Hello, inquisitive investors. This is the International Investor here, and today we are going to talk about saving, as it is the building block of investment portfolios. For those who are new to this channel, we will not be talking about complex terminology with vague words. Instead, what I try to do is to break the big ideas down into bite-sized chunks that anyone can understand regardless of prior knowledge on the subject. I will emphasize this every episode that research into each subject I cover is highly encouraged. Please do your own research before you act upon any of my advice. And if I got something wrong, please correct me in the comments section below. Without further ado, let's get right into the topic. Today, I will be going over the exponential value of the money you have right now and why you should consider saving, or even better, investing that dollar before spending it. The US dollar, as we know it, is losing its purchasing power, which is the ability to buy goods at an increasing rate. There are many reasons for the rising cost of living. It could be inflation at a rate of 5.4%. It could be from the US's uncontrolled spending, which has inspired people to invest in other asset classes, such as real estate, cryptocurrencies, and many more. Another reason why the cost of living is rising could be because the real wage earned by the average American worker is going down from what it was years ago, and the cost of everyday items is also rising. No matter what the cause may be, there is one thing for certain: the cost of living is rising. Coming across this problem, one can find it hopeless to save. However, there is a solution to this inherent money retainment problem. The solution is saving more of your income. Most Americans, according to Deloitte, are subscribed to at least one streaming service, such as Netflix, Hulu, and others. Additionally, a large percentage of Americans are subscribed to another type of service, whether it be food, fitness, or box, all the while subscribing to a streaming service. The most shocking part about this statistic is not the amount of services people use, but the amount of services people don't use but are still paying for. Creditcards.com found in a survey that 35% of Americans have signed up for a subscription or membership service without even realizing it. These services are not cheap, as subscriptions to sites such as Netflix or Amazon Prime cost as much as $12.99 a month, which is around $156 a year. One of the biggest reasons people struggle saving is because of the money they are hemorrhaging in services or memberships they didn't even know they were subscribed to. These unaccounted fees can eat up money that would have been put aside to save and invest. Instead, they go to pay for services they didn't even use. Another reason why people struggle to find money to save is because a lot of people make purchases of items they do not use enough to justify its purchase. You must ask yourself, for services like Netflix, Hulu, or Disney Plus, is the content really that different in order to justify its monthly subscription to all of them at once? In order to get money to save, people will inevitably have to cut back on expenditure. An example of this could be as simple as not getting a can of soda at the vending machine, or as complex as not doing some major renovations. The biggest reason people right now have financial problems is because their expenses eat up all of their income. In order to avoid this problem, it's always best to spend money after saving and paying your bills. Warren Buffett said it best when he said, "Do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving." Saving is really just a question of needs versus wants. A need is a necessity, such as food, water, shelter, and more. A want is an item that will either be a luxury good, an item used for leisure, or a flat-out scam. Finding out what is a need versus a want is a question for everyone to figure out on their own. The best way to figure it out, though, is to picture yourself living without the item. If you could live without the item, you probably don't need it so much. An easy way to picture this would be a new car versus a used car. A new car would be nice to have for a while, as its looks would be great, but the inherent function would be the same as a used car. There is no real need to have a flashy new car that will lose a large portion of its value when you sit in its seat. Choosing these needs versus wants can help you decide what a person really needs to buy versus what they want to buy. By no means am I saying that you should live a life of total frugality like the Amish, but by saving at least 50% of your income, you will be better off than the average person. The key to saving, however, is by not putting it all in just a bank, but instead investing it and letting your money work for you. In 1991, 30 years ago, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, DJI, was worth around $3,000, which is $6,000 if you factor in inflation. Over the past 30 years, the Dow Jones has gone up almost sixfold. If we were to make a hypothetical situation where the DJI was growing at the same rate every year, it would grow by $5,000 every 6 years. The standard growth rate seems logical to those who are not acquainted with stocks. However, as investors, we know this is not the case. If you look at 2011, which was 20 years after 1991, the DJI was only at around $14,750 compared to a hypothetical $26,000. If you look at what transpired in just the past 8 years, you will see that the DJI has gone up more than it did in its entire lifetime in the short span of 8 years. The exponential value of your every dollar drops each time you decide to spend it instead of saving and investing. The special thing about exponential functions is that almost all of the growth and the money comes at the end. The longer you hold and the more you put into the market, the more your savings and wealth will grow exponentially. If an investor were to invest $6,000 every year, which is the max amount of contributions a person under 50 can put in a Roth IRA every year if in the appropriate income bracket, into the S&P 500, which over the past 10 years has had a growth rate of 13.6%, in 5 years they would have $50,000, with 71% of its value coming from contributions. After 10 years, the investor's interest on their investment will have overtaken their total contribution of $6,000 every year. In layman's term, the money made in the market will be worth more than the money put in. In 15 years, the interest on the contribution will be worth 2 times as much as the total contribution. In 20 years, the interest on the contribution will be around 4 times as much as the total contribution, which is enough to buy an average house in the United States according to the Motley Fool. In 25 years, the total interest on the contribution will be worth more than $1 million USD. $1 million is so much you can buy a private island and have money left over. In 30 years, the interest on the contributions alone will be worth $2 million. The amount the stock grew in the previous 5 years was more than it grew in the 25 years prior. In 35 years, the interest will have doubled the previous value 5 years ago and be worth $4 million. A trend starts developing, whereas every 5 years, the amount doubles at a growth rate of 13.6%. If we go all the way into 50 years from now, the total investment will be worth around $30 million USD. $30 million is so much, if you had a growth rate of 8% on it every year, you can spend $2.4 million and never run out of money. If we go into the far future, let's say 65 years in the future, it would be worth $200 million US dollars. $200 million is so much you could buy a Gulfstream G450, a large 3-story private yacht, 4 mansions, and 15 Lamborghinis. every year and never run out of money with a growth rate of 13.6% on the total investment. This amount, albeit a great amount to have, would be unlikely for a person to achieve, as it would make them a part of the 1% of the 1%. An amount that is more realistic to achieve is 20 million in 30 years. Some listeners to this may think I am crazy and that just $1 million alone will be enough for them in retirement, but rest assured, I'll present my case as how tech stocks will be the best bet for their future fortune. Ronald Read, a prime example of the American middle-class worker, worked as a mechanic, gas station attendant, and other ordinary jobs for almost all of his life. Hearing his story, the average listener might assume that he probably retired with a small fortune of less than $1 million to his name. However, this is far from the truth. Through his frugal lifestyle and his ability to delay gratification, he was able to save up money to buy shares of blue chip stocks, which are big companies like Coca-Cola that won't fail. Ronald, unlike other people who would sell their stocks when they saw a profit, held for decades and let time and compound interest work for him. Ronald did not know much about the stock market, though, but he bought stocks he could understand, such as Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and a myriad of other stocks. Ronald amassed a fortune around $9 million by the time of his passing. By looking at Ronald's life, we can learn that it does not take a genius to become a millionaire, but instead it takes a determined, patient man who knows that big companies would only grow bigger. The key thing about being a long-term investor like Ronald Read is finding stocks that will keep growing into the future. The stocks that are not only growing but accelerating into the future are tech stocks. Over the past decade, from 2010 to 2020, there has been 2 economic recoveries from a market collapse and 1 major depression, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average being nearly halved in the span of 1 week. The one thing that has changed the most during this time frame is what institutions are in charge. In 2010, according to an article by U.S. News, the top 10 most valuable companies were either energy companies or financial institutions, with Apple and Microsoft being the only outliers. Through the past decade, there has been a shift from oil companies to tech giants, with the top 10 companies of the world consisting of mostly tech companies taking up the top 10, with outliers such as Berkshire Hathaway and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. The trend over the past decade, and especially over the pandemic, is a movement towards more tech. We can see this as the big 5 technology stocks account for around 23% of the S&P 500, according to Barron's. This tech growth is compounded by the fact that a decade ago, the tech sector was not even worth $1 trillion, whereas now the big 5 each are all over $1 trillion. They now make up a valuation of over $9 trillion, pushing $10 trillion as we speak. Now you may be wondering, okay, so tech stocks over the past decade were doing great and all, but what does that have to do with bagging $20 million in 30 years? Well, if you look at the average growth of these tech companies over the past 11 years, you will notice they have grown at a higher rate than the S&P 500. If you average them over the past 11 years, you get a growth rate of 29% annually if you ignore dividends and stock splits. If you account for stock splits and dividends, the average rises to 41.38%. That growth is astronomically high. If you had an initial investment of $400 and invested $100 each year for 30 years, with that type of growth, you would have $20 million. The power of big tech is definitely unmatched, but the real question is, will it last? I believe it will. Here's why. During the pandemic, schools, workplaces, and other facets of life had to join the digital landscape in order to stay safe from COVID-19. However, as we are getting out of the pandemic, one thing has not changed, and as our new reliance on technology. Whether it be using personal Chromebooks in schools or using Zoom meetings for work, the dependence on tech has not changed. There are many reasons for this tech-centered lifestyle, but the strongest reason is that people can no longer perform their duties without this new tech. Traditional offices filled with people in tightly packed cubicles were swapped with living rooms. People do not want to go back to working in jam-packed spaces. Instead, they want to continue working from home as it allows them to cut down on travel time entirely, spend more time with the kids, and enjoy a multitude of other factors. The pandemic, in a way, has both been a blessing and a curse and the destruction it has caused, but also a blessing with the amount of growth and new innovation in tech that has occurred over the pandemic. An example of this would be the creation of augmented reality headsets that can be used for both meetings and the military by Microsoft. The tech revolution has not ended, it is just starting. The amount of wealth that will be created in the next few decades by the tech sector alone will be in the tens of trillions. The question is, are you ready to embrace the revolution and invest in tech?